Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. Our guest this morning is a Navy veteran who is biking across America, actually the lower 48 states. And he is on a mission to spread a message about mental health and mental well-being. This is an incredible conversation and an incredible test of faith. This morning, we welcome to the OPT Network, fresh off the road and in Alexandria, Louisiana, Lieutenant Dan is what we'll call him. His name is Daniel Hurd. Daniel, good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you, and just your aura and your presence has brought so much light already into our space. I want you to talk about PTSD, but many people think that PTSD is relegated to serving in the military, being on the battlefield, but yours was quite something different.
Yes, it was.
Tell me about the pain that started that PTSD in your life.
Well, it started as a child. Unfortunately, I was molested as a child, physically, sexually, and mentally abused. And it was by people that were close to me and my family. And unfortunately, at the time, I didn't think anything of it. It just seemed so natural at a young age. But as I got a little older...
Did you think it was normal?
At the time, yeah. I didn't think anything was out of the ordinary, in a sense.
And you were 5 years old?
Yeah.
When the abuse started?
As far as I can remember back, yeah. And you know, it got to a point where I started using drugs at an early age.
When was your first recollection of using drugs? 7
years old. I started drinking and smoking cigarettes and smoking marijuana. And then as I got older, it became harder drugs and doing like pills and cocaine and different things into that.
Just progressing.
Progressing. By the time I was a teenager, I was going in the wrong direction, and I was fortunate to put into foster care.
How and when did that happen?
I believe I was around 11 years old. It was either right before I was 11 or right after. But
so you were taken from your parents?
I was taken from my dad.
From your dad?
In Massachusetts, and put in my first actual foster home was the people I was already living with, and he had to move out. So, and then I continued on, and I got put into different places at different times, and a lot of it was because of mistakes that family members had made. And
what do you mean mistakes?
Well, not per se mistakes, but like wrong direction ideas and the thoughts that they were having between like child pornography and stuff like that. And it really just got to a point where...
Do you start to think as a kid, why won't somebody protect me? Why won't somebody make this stop?
When I was at that age, I really didn't have those, like I had those thoughts, but I didn't really think too much into them because I just thought it was routine. It wasn't until the end of middle school, beginning of high school, that like the DARE program was a thing. And the police officer comes in and he pulls out his briefcase and he shows all these drugs that are not legal, that you're not supposed to do. And
you're already taking some of them.
And I'm looking at them, and I've done about 3/4 of them at that point. And, you know, at that point in my life, I thought my norm was norm. And in reality, it was far from it. And
what did that DARE program and that DARE officer make you think that day? Can you remember what you thought when you looked at that and said, gosh, this is my life?
I was in shock because, like I said, at that point, I didn't think drugs were a bad thing. It was easily accessible in my home and in the area that I lived in, people that I knew. It was just like routine lifestyle. And it wasn't until then that, yeah, I didn't particularly care too much because I was already doing them, and it was...
Was it helping, in your mind, was it helping to numb the pain of being abused?
Absolutely. You know, at the time, I think it was just more for... I didn't connect it to that at the time. It was just something that my body naturally was like, hey, you feel better when you're on this, and instead of being just yourself. So enjoy it while you can and keep doing it type thing.
So when do you reach a turning point? Is there a time where you become stable in foster care?
Yeah, so I had a family actually take me in at my 14th birthday, and they became my permanent guardians and everything. And they started taking me to counseling. Before that, I was going to counseling, but again, I was younger, and as much as my dad and other people were doing things that weren't nice.
So your dad and your grandfather were molesting you. Were you able to say that to your foster family when you find that safety? Are you able to say to them what's really happened to you?
Not at first. It wasn't until pretty much after the military, where I even like took the time in actual therapy sessions to kind of have those thoughts that I had put away for a long time and didn't want to remember, that came back.
So even as a child, when you were going into therapy, had you not spoken it?
I had not spoken it. I didn't speak about it realistically until I was about 27, 26. And I'm 29, almost 30 now. So it's only been a few years since I've actually even wanted to talk about it.
Is it still hard?
Every day gets a little easier because I talk to so many people, and I share my story about that and the military and drug use and the fact that I just deal with long-term depression still on a daily basis. I've just found the tools that and the resources that I need to keep me happy and keep me going. And the lifestyle that I've decided has really made my life a lot simpler, so it keeps me positive.
But before you got here on this journey to some sanity and some peace, you had attempted to take your life on 3 separate occasions.
I did. So I tried it when I was 17. It was never reported. Not many people even knew about it. And after that, I joined the military.
After 17?
Yeah, right after my 18th birthday, I joined. And I ended up...
What was the impetus for that? Because you certainly, at that time, probably were not the best candidate. In your own mind, I'm thinking.
No, definitely not. A lot of it was, I've always wanted to be a helper, and I wanted to do something good, even though I was feeling depressed or angry and whatever other things I had. I always wanted to help people, and that was my way of making me feel better, even though it wasn't the permanent solution, as much as I was making it that. And so when I decided to join the military, it was something that I wanted to do as a kid, and it just got to a point where I think it really got motivated. I had just tried to commit suicide. I was like, I might as well go serve my country, and if I die, I die there, and at least I'll be remembered as a positive instead of a negative. And it was when I joined the military and I left home, I left New England, things started actually getting better. It wasn't for about 10 years until I did my second suicide attempt when I went back home. And things started coming out, and I started talking about things that I had put away into the vault that I didn't want to ever remember. And it really just got to a point where I just wanted to start feeling better. And it was certain people that came into my life that would ask the right questions finally. People would ask the right questions, and I'd be like, wow, no one's ever asked me that way. And that opened the door in that safe, like they cracked the code type thing.
Wow. Hold that thought. We're going to take a break here, but when we come back, we're going to talk about Lieutenant Dan's journey and what it is meaning to so many people across America. Stay on point. We're back after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. Our guest this morning is Daniel Hurd, a.k.a. Lieutenant Dan. He is trekking across the United States, the lower 48, talking about PTSD and really opening up and peeling back the layers of his own life. And in almost every story that we tell, when you begin to open up and share your life's journey and the atrocities of life that have happened to you, of no consequence of your own, nothing that you have done to perpetrate the things that have happened to you or to perpetuate those things, you begin to heal. And that's what we're talking about, how he is helping people to heal one petal at a time. And before we went to break, you were talking about really unearthing all of those things that you probably worked so hard to forget.
Absolutely.
And so as you start to open up that metaphorical Pandora's box, what is it like when you start to remember?
A little bit at first, it's daunting. Like the things that you've tried to hide for so long and forget about, kind of really kind of start flooding in, and um,
Does it seem surreal?
absolutely. There's been times where I even questioned if it actually happened because of other people saying it never happened. So,
The perpetrators who say that it never happened.
yeah, even people that are supporters of them just say that they would never do that, or why did it happen to you and not anybody else? Because I have siblings.
Wow.
And it made me for a long time question my own thoughts
And does that take you deeper into the abyss of your thoughts and into that mental almost decline?
absolutely. So when I started getting deeper into uncovering a lot of my stuff, I was going through a lot, and when I was 27, I actually attempted my second suicide attempt. A lot of it was due to drug use. I put myself in a psychosis on cocaine. But a lot of the issues that I was having was paranoia of having people following me, certain people, and just having all these things that I was going through, and I was doing cocaine just to kind of re-hide those things, or at least make it so I could deal with it. And over time, it just got worse and worse until I finally didn't want to deal with it anymore, and made a plan, and unfortunately tried to commit my second suicide attempt. And it took a lot of for my second suicide attempt. I asked for help, but I didn't ask the right people. I kind of beat around the bush. I didn't really say what was going on with me, but I said I needed help. People always looked at me and was like, "Dude, you're the guy that we all come to for our help. Like, you'll be fine."
Right.
And people just didn't, not for their own reasons. They just didn't know. They didn't have the understanding and the signs and the invitations that people give, and so I was doing the same thing that everybody else does. I was kind of beating around the bush, saying I need help, but not per se really coming out and saying I need help.
Right. You wanted somebody to take a deeper dive.
Yeah.
And to see your pain.
Yeah. And it didn't happen, and it got to a point where when a few people I knew realized that I was going to try my suicide attempt, and they started calling everybody, and people started blowing me up, and in that attempt, for whatever reason, I don't know what popped into my head, but I said, if one person calls me that I don't expect to call me, then
that's a sign.
And it was a sign, and they did call me, and it worked out. I was really upset at the time, obviously. They ended up taking me to the hospital, and I didn't want to go, and even though I told myself that I wasn't going to do it if that person called me, that I still wanted to. And
at that time, you didn't really have any God consciousness.
I did not. God didn't come into my life until I was on this journey. So
did you ever wonder where God was? Did you wonder if there was a God? On the journey to everything that happened to you in your little life, in your young life, and then it followed you into adulthood, and and it just all this tumult going on.
For the longest time, there were times where I'd go to church and I would go through the motions and try to find that people talk about finding God, and it just never worked for me, because a lot of the time I had the thought process that if my physical parents and my physical family members and people that were involved in that could do harm to me, then why would there be a God that
unknowing God,
that would allow that to happen to me? So, for a long, long time, that was my thought process. There could not be a God, because if there was, he wouldn't let all these bad things happen to me. And now looking back on it, maybe it wasn't his intention to have those things happen to me, but those events that I've had to deal with has actually made me a stronger person. It's made it so that I can go and talk to other people and help them in their own situations, because we're all, even though my story is in its own, You know, everybody has the same story. It's just a matter of which part's different and not. Different names, different people, but it's all the same. And that's really where it goes from.
Where do you come, at what point do you come into sanity? What point do you get clean and sober and sane?
So it was after my second suicide attempt. It took me a little while, but I stopped doing drugs pretty much in whole.
Did you just stop?
No, it took me about 4 or 5 months. So by October of 2016, I had moved to Maine, so I wasn't around the people that I was hanging out with. It gave me an opportunity to get away from those things that I was struggling with, and that's also where I had the mindset that I was on top of things. I was taking medication. I was going to therapy when I could, and then I had some issues financially. I lost everything I had, and it kind of took a toll on me because I think I was at 28 years old. I was just kind of enjoying things, but I also had a lot of savings. I was doing really well, and then I lost it all at once. It just kind of, everything fell apart. I blamed it because at that time I was blaming it on because I was doing so good when I was on drugs.
Right.
I didn't steal from people. I always made my own money. I did everything I needed to do. And now that I'm not doing it, I'm losing money. I'm not making as much. I'm not doing things the same way. And so for a long time, I contemplated on going back and doing drugs, and maybe my life would get better again. And but because of the financial struggle I was having, I ended up having a friend of mine that gave me a job and let me stay on his property that I worked on. And I was very fortunate for it, but at the same time, I didn't think I could get out of it. So one day I waited until I gave myself an excuse, and I went into my car and tried carbon monoxide poisoning. Fortunate that someone saw me and saved me, and I ended up going back and getting the help I needed. And after I got out of the hospital that time, my best friend got me on a bicycle, and that was the changing point. It wasn't the first couple rides, but going riding with him and going distances and going one pedal at a time, and really made me realize that it wasn't about the past, it wasn't about the future, it was about in the moment and living in the moment. And it was all because of that friend that really had my transition of change, because I was actually planning my 4th attempt after I got out of the hospital.
Hold that thought. We're going to talk about living in the moment, one pedal at a time. Stay on point. We're back with more of Lieutenant Dan's story after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. You know how we just believe that one conversation at a time, one story at a time, we are changed. And now we will add one pedal at a time. Our guest this morning, Daniel Hurd, a.k.a. Lieutenant Dan, is taking us through his journey of PTSD and mental health issues, and really beginning to excavate those demons that have held him bondage for years. Now it's out in the open, and he is trekking across America, the lower 48 states, really spreading a message of hope and healing. And before we went to break, Lieutenant Dan, you were talking about that last time that you attempted to take your life, and you were pulled out of that carbon monoxide car, and your friend says what to you when you are finally pulled out?
After I get out of the hospital.
After you get out of the hospital?
He knew I was still struggling, but he didn't realize how deep I was still struggling. I was telling everybody I was good, and pretty much like routine, like I'm fine, leave me alone type thing. And really, I was already planning my 4th attempt, how I could get not seen or not found, especially by people that knew me. And
but somewhere deep down inside, did you want to really be found, do you think?
Yes and no. I think everybody wants somebody to find them, in the sense of give them that hope to continue living on. And unfortunately, not every time that happens. And but I think there was a lot that I had a higher purpose that I didn't know about at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And
So he introduces you at some point to a bicycle. What do you think?
well, so he had tried for like 5 years to get me on a bicycle.
5 years.
And I rode motorcycles. I was not downgrading myself to a pedal bike.
Mm-hmm.
That was my thought process.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of what I tell people now is to try everything, you know.
Right. Because you never know.
You never know. And, you know, it could be the one thing that can save your life. It could save somebody else's life.
Right. And it's important to note that you were a lot heavier
I was
when you started the journey.
I was about 270 pounds on my third suicide attempt. And when I started bicycling, I was about 240. And when I left on this trek, I was about 190. And
Tell me about the first trek that you took with your friend.
So we did 2 short rides first, but the big ride was we did 166 miles. And this was the changing point in my life. And my slogan and my philosophy of life and everything came from my friend. We were doing 166 miles over a weekend. And on the way back to where we started, I was struggling, and he stopped, and he's like, bro, it's one pedal at a time. It's left, right, left, right. It doesn't matter what you did before. It doesn't matter what we have left. As long as you think about that moment.
How did you internalize that? Because that really stuck with you. It's one pedal at a time, left, right, left, right. It doesn't matter where we came from. It doesn't necessarily matter even where we're going. It's just one pedal at a time.
So at that very, very moment, obviously it stuck with me, but I didn't really understand why.
It didn't go right.
At the end of that ride, and when I started, I ended up buying my own bicycle and started riding. Every time I'd start to struggle, for whatever reason, that his voice would pop in my head and say, you got this. It's one pedal at a time, left, right, left, right. And anytime I struggled, that would just give me the motivation to keep going. And the longer I had that in my mind, I realized that it was about living in the moment. And it literally felt like I had somebody take a glow stick and throw it in my dark void that I was stuck in. And that glow stick made me realize
a glow stick that was thrown into your dark void.
Yeah, and it felt like in that void and in that space of mind that we get stuck in, I call it the void, but, sometimes we think we're so deep that there's no way out of it. And that's where our depression and our suicidal thoughts come from, I think. And that moment when I realized all this, it was like, hey, I'm not as deep in here as I thought I was.
Right.
And that was like the moment where I thought I could get out of it, and I knew I could get out of it. It was just a matter of how I could. And
when did God show up on the journey for you? On your road to Damascus?
So I started this journey in March of 2018. I was not a believer in God. It was August of 2018. I was in Ohio, and I couldn't find a place to sleep that night. A couple days before I had some major events happen between somebody trying to commit suicide and a violent act against me potentially, which
somebody
was avoided.
Pulled a gun on you.
Yeah, someone pulled a gun, and very fortunate that a police officer pulled onto the street as it happened, and the guy took off. So.
Did you consider that divine intervention at that moment? Did you know?
Absolutely not.
No. What did you think? I was just lucky.
I was just lucky. And it's funny because I actually called my best friend.
And said how lucky you were.
I called him. I was like, just stay on the phone with me. This is where I am. If you don't hear back from me in a few minutes, then
call
something
the
happened. Yeah. And he's like, I'll just stay on the phone with you. And it was probably like 5-10 minutes later. I was fine. I was out of that area and I was good. But he was the first person I called, and me and him actually speak almost every day still. So it was really good. But at that moment, yeah, I just thought it was.
And so fast forward, when do you invite God into your heart?
So 2 days later.
Okay.
I was finishing up New York. I had just crossed through the Erie, Pennsylvania area and into Ohio. And I couldn't find a place to sleep that night. It's like open area.
Do people think that you're homeless when they see your bicycle all decked out with, I mean,
it's 150 pounds of gear.
150 pounds of gear.
So, yeah, I tend to tell people, about a third of people look at me like I'm a homeless bum, shun their kids away from me. A third of people look at me like I'm a superhero, that they can't say anything to me, but they're just staring at me like, wow.
Exactly.
And then the other third really are the ones that are like, hey, what are you doing? I want to know, like, tell me what you're doing. And I give them my card and talk to them. And that's where a lot of people have been saved in a way,
right,
through their own suicide attempts because of just connecting with me.
And so 2 nights, you can't find any place to sleep.
I can't find anywhere to sleep. I have no service on my phone. I'm still trying to find something. For whatever reason, a church popped onto my map.
Come on.
A couple miles away.
Uh-huh.
I was like, I'll give it a shot. Maybe they'll let me stay on the property.
Mm-hmm.
And so I go there, and the pastor was there, so he talked to me, and it happened to be a Wednesday night, so it was Bible study night.
Yeah.
Or prayer night. And so I attended the service, and after the service, he wanted to talk to me, so we talked, and he asked me, he's like, if I had ever accepted Jesus in my life. And even though I had gone to church as a kid and a little bit as an adult, I never
accepted
it. I didn't even know there was an acceptance prayer.
Right.
So when he did, and thinking about
when he asked you that, and you didn't know that you could make a declaration by just saying the prayer and inviting God into your life, what did you think? Because you still had a lot of stuff happen.
Absolutely.
But you had seen a lot of divinity along the way as well.
I saw a lot of signs. I think that, as much as I wasn't a believer at that moment and up until that moment, there was definitely something that was working through me and through my surroundings. Mm-hmm. Because anytime I want to give up, I remember this one vivid memory is I had the most rusted car I'd ever seen in Vermont drive by me in the moments where I was like, I'm just going to drop this bike and walk away. I can't do this. And the only reason I even looked up and looked at this car was because of how rusted it was. But on the back of the car, it had 2 pure white stickers on it and said, "He loves you, keep going." And maybe it wasn't at that moment. I was like, wow, if that's not a sign, that I don't know what is. And so I kept going. And then I came across a church that had a very powerful message that I took a picture with. And, it worked out really well. And at that moment, I was like, all right, there's got to be something, but I don't know what it is. Uh-huh. And when he asked me that question, there was just this feeling of warmth and peace that just immediately as he said it, I started crying. Wow. And and I wasn't much of a crier up until New York. I had actually reached my 3,000 mile mark, and mm-hmm. I cried for 24 hours. I couldn't stop crying. Wow. And but it was all for good reasons. It was all good. Uh-huh. and milestones and everything. But it really got to a point where when he asked that question, I had that such warming sensation, that feeling of invitingness, mm-hmm. that I was meant to do it. And I did. And that evening, I actually had a conversation with my mom that I never had before about being molested. And
did she believe you?
Absolutely. She was shocked.
Did that validate you some?
To an extent, I don't need validation. I don't believe anymore. Good. And, I don't tell my story for sympathy or anything like that. Not at all. But it's to get other people to realize that there are people like them, and I'm no different than anybody else. I'm not a superhero just because I'm bicycling America. I'm an average guy that deals with pain every day still, that mm-hmm. deals with mental health issues, that really just wants to show people that we have it in our body and our mind to make a step forward and continue on. Absolutely. And it's important to note that Lieutenant Dan has helped numerous of people on the journey that were thinking of taking their lives. And Lieutenant Dan, what we'd like to do is at various times, we want to Skype you in and just follow the progression and your journey one pedal at a time. Thank you for stopping at our door, and we want to thank the Dixons for making this connection. God had a plan for us to meet yesterday, and a plan for me to be here. I definitely believe in. Before we end, I just want to make sure I just started a nonprofit organization called the One Pedal at a Time movement. It's to promote bicycling as a whole, but we're going to be raising awareness for suicide and getting funds for that, and that's in the process of being built right now. But as that continues out, you'll be able to find all that information through ridewithdanusa.com or OPAAT movement.com. There you go. Lieutenant Dan, you are a source of light. Thank you. Indeed. Stay on point, everybody. We're back after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. This is the final point on point today. Oftentimes when we see people like Lieutenant Dan, and if you come across him on his bicycle somewhere in America, you'll wonder,
what is he doing? Is he homeless? Who is he really? And it's conversations like this that really help us to glean into the heart of people and mental illness. And we talk about mental illness as much as we possibly can on this show because it is an issue that continues to pervade the minds of many people. And I really felt Lieutenant Dan's heart when he took us back to the little boy that had been abused by not only his grandfather, but his father. And he said to us after the conversation was over, this is the very first time that I was able to even really verbalize the fact that I had been abused by my grandfather and my father. And it's so hard for people who are on the journey to healing when others don't accept their truth. And he has found his calling and found freedom and energy to feed his spirit and his soul. And during the conversation, we talked about the little boy that became a man who believed that a loving, kind God would never have allowed these atrocities to be perpetrated on him, because anytime an adult takes advantage of a child, I feel that strongly about it. It is an atrocity. It is just a shame. And he has gone through his adult life dealing with the post-traumatic stress of what happened to him as a child. And on that journey of reliving that, had tried to take his life not once, not twice, but 3 times, and found on this journey a Savior, a loving God that he was able to invite into his life. And he, through his salvation, is on a journey to help others to conquer those demons and say, you know what? We were all placed on this planet for a purpose. And he said, you know, on this journey, I have helped countless people, and I have prevented them from taking their lives. And he said, you know what? God has shown up every step of the way, right when I needed it the most. And so what it does for him and for people like us that are listening and watching the journey, it restores and builds our faith in God. He said, even to the bicycle that he was riding, how God just showed up. And this bicycle, this exact bicycle that he could not order online, that came from Germany, the exact bicycle that he needed to make this trek through the 48 states of America, he found it in New York. And so everything that he has needed every step of the way was provided. Then he comes through central Louisiana, more specifically Avoyelles Parish. And somebody's behind him in DC, and our team, they see him as they're delivering food boxes, and they wonder, wow, that guy looks like he's living on his bicycle. And at first glance, you would think, maybe he's homeless. And they didn't think a thing of it. And then he continued the trek, and his tires started wobbling. And God placed somebody right behind him that not only helped him to fix his bicycle, but gave him shelter, beautiful shelter for the night. And I'm going to tell you, there's nothing better. And this journey is not for everybody. It's what Lieutenant Dan is called to do, but there's nothing better than putting your faith out there and saying, okay, God, I trust that every need that I have, you'll find a way to provide it for me. And that in itself, it just helped my faith. And it showed me what a bright light that we can see in people when they are doing the work and the mission of God. And so we wish Lieutenant Dan well and safety and good health as he continues to trek the United States. We're out of time for now. This has been the final point on Point today. Stay with us, everybody. We're back to wrap up right after this.